Ho ho ho.
Ho, ho, ho.
Okay, how you doing, Professor?
I'm great.
So this conversation, I was hoping, or I'm hoping, because we haven't done it yet, we'll have kind of a mixture of happiness and a mixture of reflection. I don't want it to be much about politics. It seems like everybody wants to just like post some meme every single day for the rest of their life on they either love Trump or hate Trump. And I don't know why humans have forgotten some basic instinct of cycles. There's a winter, spring, summer, or fall. There was a song written about that. And I think you pointed out it's from the Bible.
Yeah.
Why do we have to be always on the rage machine can't we just take a break for Thanksgiving and Christmas? So those, as you see, I try to do that with you. I don't want to talk about the budget today. Do you? I mean, maybe there's something in current events. AI just released its own press release. Did you see that? It just happened a couple minutes ago. They created their own
No.
press release saying that murder of this healthcare CEO was assassinated or killed or something. They just made AI made it up itself supposedly and sent it out. Well, wow, okay, that's weird. But I don't want to talk about that today. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I don't know anything about that
I
particular
know, but
story.
do you want to
I
talk
don't
about the budget or
show off
Trump's
my
thing?
ignorance. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Musk or is there anything that we need to talk about politically today?
I'm always down for whatever you want to throw out. So I
Okay,
never
well,
want to
you're
say
good
no.
extemporaneous thinker. So let's see how you do on this today. So good. The answer is no. Next week, if we're available, I think we should kind of do a 2024 wrap up. The most important public policy things that happened in 2024. Trump getting reelected again. That's pretty amazing. So yes, we should talk about all sorts of stuff next Friday, with a little bit of prognostication on 2025. Sound fair?
Okay.
So this week is nothing about current events and politics. It's more of a sociological thing. I'd like to see if you have any sense of history for us that can make us be more introspective, but not in a melancholy way. I don't want this to be deep thoughts with Jack Handy. I want it to be more Monty Python Life of Brian. What is the meaning of life? You sent me on to a book a while ago. It was by Edmund Morgan. By Edmund
Yeah.
Morgan.
Yeah.
It was about the founding of our country. And it went through chapters about what a settler's life would be like and what the frontiersmen like and what relationship with the Indian tribes. And so it was really, I had no idea. You told me to read that book for some other reason. And the next thing I'm reading about the mind of a person who's having a really tough life. What was that book about?
American slavery, American freedom.
Yeah,
It
that's
was,
what I thought it was going to
yeah,
be
yeah.
about, but it
I mean,
wasn't.
really, it was about the um, where the idea of slavery comes from and the development of slavery as an institution in the United States.
But it went in deep into the psyche of states, Virginia versus other states and what the kind of people that made up Virginia were. And I mean, it was a really deep book. Does everyone think that's a deep book, or is it just you and I that think that's a
Well, it won almost every award you could win, but it
huh.
was back when it was published. But yeah, I think it's wrongfully overlooked now.
Well,
It was a big deal when it came out.
but why? I don't want to talk about this per se, but why don't people read deep thoughts? I mean, this is a good time of year when it's colder and you're not out there planting vegetables or you're not farming or ranching as much. Seems like we'd all sit down with a good book over the holidays. Am I wrong? I mean, maybe a lot of people do that, but
I think I mean, to answer, we're distracted. Everything about our lives is pulling our attention away, and the idea of reading something that's long or complicated or takes a while, it's rewarding and it's the only thing that's ever going to make you happy, but we're constantly just distracted, and filling every single moment with activity, but it's pseudo activity, fake activity,
well,
confusing activity with accomplishment.
but I like fake activity. This will crack you up because you're a real musician. But the reason I was a couple of minutes late is for our Christmas holiday, family's coming over, and we're gonna have more of a buffet or something, not a sit down family dinner this year because we want it to be a game day. We wanna play games, whether it's cards or Hungry Hippo or I broke out Guitar Hero for the first time in a decade. So I was playing a couple songs from Guitar Hero, and I got to get on this podcast. There's nothing wrong with Guitar Hero or a real
No,
instrument, is there?
and there's nothing wrong with entertainment either. But I was thinking mainly of anything involving your phone
Hmm.
that we use to fill every moment of discomfort or distraction or boredom, and often keeps us from doing things that take a while, like finishing a book.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think I've got us in the right kind of tone. It's not melancholy, it's not sad. It's bringing family together. It's talking about holidays, a little bit of reflection time. A lot of people are sad when they reflect on it. Most aren't, but a lot are. But that's the kind of conversation I'd like to talk about. So tell us about before we get to faith, which is one of the main things I want to talk about. I want to talk about Christmas. And I also want to talk about, well, wait, not everybody's Christian, so I don't know. Let's hear from Bart for a little bit, and what's the relationship of Judaism. But before we get to that, can you give us any sense of history? Because I'm still confused of history of family. I mean, like right now, you have in America, you can get divorced, you can just leave your parents at a certain age, and you can go to a different state and start a new life, and whatever somebody's willing to hire you. Is that always been true when we were a peasant in England or the something of France? I mean, what is the history of family that we should be considering at this time of year?
Well, it's funny. I think all these topics are somewhat intertwined. First, to understand that the history of politics is the history of peace. What is it that makes it possible to live in a peaceful life with one another? And you essentially had to live with your families for simple security reasons. So, as the United States became more peaceful, you you needed your family less and less. And as rule of law and established American institutions were put into place, and as they became more widely practiced, it it means more possibilities for independence, and that your relationship with your family wasn't simply something necessary for survival. And one of the things that Edmund Morgan pointed out in a different book was, New England kind of invented the idea of grandparents to that the idea
Hey,
and
New England, you can't, yo, BS. There must be some place in Africa or Central America. I
well,
mean,
there
that
was always a concept of elders, but the idea that it would be normal for children to know grandparents, really that I mean, I'm remembering this from an old Edmund Morgan book, but that was really it really became normal in New England, for the first
you're
time. And
saying that Chinese families didn't, or Indonesian families, I mean, or Indian family, they're
perhaps, but that a lot of that is how close were these generations born, that sort of thing. But the idea that it was regular, that it was normal, that it was not extraordinary, um,
hmm,
is you know common, and it wasn't just among elites either. That it was regular people. So it wasn't just, oh, you're uh, your elites have easy enough lives that they're living long enough to know grandparents, but it's that basically everybody in New England could know their grandparents.
interesting. So, Professor, you hit on a trend that I want to make, or an idea that I want to make sure we flesh out. So we might as well do it right now. Is there a difference between poor people and the aristocracy, or however we wish to phrase that, rich or monarchs or whatever, on how they view holidays and work? And I mean, can you be just as happy and have time to celebrate when you're poor, when you're 2000 years ago in Syria? I mean, were you just, hey, let's celebrate some pagan holiday or whatever they had at that time? Can you give a little bit of sense of history of where we got to as far as the real person? I think I'm thinking working class people and poor people, people that are really struggling. Do they, how have they viewed life?
No, I mean, the extent to which you can engage in any leisure time activity is really You know, I mean, you might be able to carve out a few minutes here or there, or a few hours, or um, but the idea of celebrating with excess and plenty for multiple days is really something that could have only happened.
When?
Um,
That's what I'm looking for. When? Is it like in the last 100 years or the last 500 years?
no, not the last 500 years. Let's see. I mean, I guess you'd say in England and the United States, again, that starts in the seven, you'd say like 1750s, I mean, and then by the middle of the 19th century, England and America and some parts of Europe, oh, they had the revolutions and stuff. Really, you're talking about Europe and the United States, late 19th century. Um,
Well, was that the Industrial Revolution? What happened that allowed people to have some more leisure time?
well, it was, sort of, you have to get a little bit past the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a necessary, um, uh, but not sufficient condition because, the early Industrial Revolution was no picnic. But once it's established, that's when you begin seeing people working for wages and uh, able to, I mean, working for wages means you already have a rule of law in place. You already have some place that is safe that you're going home to, and the ability to save a little bit of money that you could use for gifts and that sort of thing. You're really talking late 19th, early 20th century. I mean, I'd say the big revolution for the United States comes in the late 19th century, then again in the 1920s, and then 1950s. And
So, jumping around as we always do, and that's my fault, not yours. Why do so many think that we're in such bleak times right now? Because you've just give a kind of a bit broad brush picture that, well, even poor people in the United States have some luxury time that probably people around the world don't have. Most people don't they work 7 days a week? I mean, there's not a day of Sabbath, is there?
uh, uh, a lot of the world is pretty industrialized now.
Yeah,
I hate to, since the late 90s, so the last 30 years really have also, the conditions around the world have improved pretty considerably since the
that's true.
1990s.
There's like been a billion people taken out of poverty or so. That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. So I don't want to make it exclusively about the United States and plenty now, because you see it in all over the world. Once you get 10, 15, 20 years past industrialization, you kind of see conditions improving generally. Uh, so I'm sorry, get back. What was your question again?
Well,
Sorry, I got.
do you not have friends that just wring their hands every day over
Oh,
all
well,
sorts
it's
of stuff?
because I guess here's why we get a little bit melancholy is that uh, we should realize how fragile this is, not how robust it is. And um, and then the other thing that we should never sort of forget is that all of our, I guess it always goes back to Nazis.
Oh,
There's
God.
there's a scary lesson in history as well as a nice lesson. The sort of nice lesson is that um, following the example of our founding um, leads to a pretty good result because human beings can govern themselves. That's the sort of the good news. Hamilton was right. Um, the bad news is that human beings will also give up liberty in exchange for security. And
Is that what Franklin warned us about?
yeah, so there's a part of this that we have to be extremely vigilant about. And precisely because when things are going well, or we are not the focus of the oppression, um, we're pretty willing to sacrifice the liberties of others for for our own comfort. And that's the sort of the bad news about human nature. That's the bad old news, is that we can get pretty tribal, and uh, especially when it comes to protecting people we don't like, or um, speech we don't like, behavior we don't like, whatever it is, we're pretty willing to throw liberty out the window.
Hmm.
And again,
Well,
not
we've
to get
had
too melancholy, but the good side is that if you teach people to do these things, it can work. But these values have to be taught, and if we cease to teach them, they do just sort of go away, and we'll always risk becoming a people where, um, you know, we're willing to sacrifice unpopular people for our own comfort.
yeah. So you mentioned not in jest, but in I don't know, wistfulness. Not no, and that's the exact opposite of the word. I don't. You mentioned Hitler. Why? That's the natural extreme of the worst case.
Yeah, or and I guess there's a sort of a gamble that we're making with China, that we made with China in the 70s, where we thought maybe if they have enough material comfort that eventually they will overthrow the oppressive government. And so far, it hasn't proven to be true,
Yeah.
um, because violence does an extremely good job of keeping down popular opinion. And
Well, and it's really hard to compete against too. If it's free market in many ways, capitalism is like, hey, I want to start a company and build something great. But boy, you mention something against the dear leader and they just kill you. I mean, well, it's hard to compete when half of America hates the other half. All of China loves China's leader, right?
yeah, exactly. So,
Huh.
it-
Well, so let's get off China for a second and get to another main theme. Um, we were founded as a Judeo-Christian nation. No, that's not quite right. We were founded as a nation of individual conscience and choice of faith. Well, yeah, that's probably right. But tell us, you're the history
well,
professor.
I my motto is always, I will do no preparation, but I did see the title and I did a little preparation.
Okay, well,
So I
this
broke my own rule. Uh,
103rd show. This is the first time,
it's
Professor.
the
Don't make
first
me
time,
forget.
yeah, and it's just because there's a document um, I, that I teach, but I've never. Um, I don't have it sort of memorized like I have so many others. And there was another question I had about it, which was George Washington's letter to the Jewish congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. And it's easy to um, say that, oh, this is overstated, but I don't think it is. And I wanted to know a little more about the backstory of it. So this uh, Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, wrote George Washington a letter, and sort of said, thanks, and we think you're doing a good job. Um, but there's one paragraph that he wrote them back and repeated some of their language, and I think it's important. So this is one paragraph of what they wrote to him. Deprived as we heretofore have been of the invaluable rights as free citizens, we now, with a deep sense of gratitude to the Almighty Disposer of all events, behold a government erected by the majesty of the people, a government, and here's the language that I, I like quite a bit, a government which to bigotry gives no sanction, to persecution no assistance, but generally affording to all liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship, deeming everyone of whatever nation, tongue, language, equal parts of the great governmental machine. This so ample and extensive a federal union, whose basis is philanthropy, mutual confidence, and public virtue. And
Yeah,
um,
deep paragraph.
yeah, but so I just want to draw attention to a couple of things within that. That it was already understood that liberty of conscience was commonplace, and that's what the federal government was providing. But we have to also remember liberty of conscience doesn't mean you get to impose your beliefs on others. And I think this is also a frustration people have is as our government moves away from, in fact, one of the crazy things is I wanted to see how people have used this phrase in a modern context. And so I just started Googling different variations of this, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. And in almost every case, it was used by people to justify um, trying to change other people's minds, which is the opposite of
Right.
what they're saying. It's saying, no, 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 no. This is a government which, people get to be bigots, but the government is not going to help them. An important distinction. And yeah, people are going to engage in bad behavior, but the government is not going to assist in the persecution. And the and this is what people can hope for, and that was what we would call tolerance. So when Washington wrote back to them, he says some other things, but he also repeats that language back to them. So before I get to Washington's reply, do you have any thoughts about the initial letter to Washington, or do you want me to just go to the next
Well, it's just such a deep. I don't think I've ever heard that letter, by the way, ever. So it's really fun to hear something so deep. Was this when he was a general or when he was president?
He was president. They were talking about he was doing a good job as president, uh, and so then he writes him back uh, and says, thank you. It's nice to hear that somebody thinks I'm doing a good
And
job.
by the way, just a quick aside, Professor. In
Yeah,
that time, much simpler times, you could just walk right up to the White House, I guess. Um,
uh,
kind of.
you could
There
get a
wasn't
letter to him. Yeah,
wasn't offense. Well, anyway, in those simpler times, do you think he actually wrote it, or did he have staff that
there
replied?
is some people claim that Jefferson might have written this reply, but I I don't know if any modern linguists have sort of pointed the new AI linguistic tools at this letter to figure out if Jefferson or Washington wrote it. It seems pretty Washington-y to me, but I don't have the linguistic skills to
Cool. That's
make
just an interesting
comments.
aside, because right now the president hardly ever writes a letter, do they?
Um, I mean, depends on the president and depends on the letter,
Okay.
Um, some presidents, yeah, we have lots of letters that they wrote.
In
Others, I mean,
tweets.
Lincoln wrote a lot of letters, but so did Nicolay and Hay, his secretaries. So,
Okay.
you have some that are written by other people, but presidents do write letters themselves. I mean,
Okay.
Bush and Reagan did this a lot too. Presidents will often handwrite letters so that people will know, like, yeah, I wrote this. Uh, Eisenhower would type or dictate letters a lot, and you can just tell that. I mean, I feel like I know when Eisenhower was writing, but he dictated a lot of letters and then he would sign them. And then sometimes he would put like little, margin notes in them. Uh,
So you can review it, and this is my letter. Yeah.
yeah, and PS and, that sort of thing.
I got you off track. Go back
Yeah.
to
So
here.
anyway, um, so Washington replies back and says, thank you. Um, and it's nice to hear from all classes of citizens and groups of people. Anyway, he starts, I think the interesting part of his reply starts with, if we have wisdom to make the best use of the advantages to which we are now favored, we cannot fail under the just administration of good government to become a great and happy people. And I thought that was a nice sentiment to remember, this time of year, that ultimately the function of politics is politics can't make you happy, but it can create the preconditions for happiness. It is in our declaration, the word happiness. The idea is that, like, anyway. So I like that, and then he says the citizens of the United States can applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. And that's also an understanding of what we've always defined as American exceptionalism properly understood, right? which is that what we're here to do is provide people with an example is you can do this, you know, you can have a civilization where you don't just murder Jews, that you can just leave them alone. All right. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now it is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. Meaning, this is not something that one better group of people was granting to a lesser group of people, but that all enjoy their natural rights as their natural inheritance. And he's saying that's now we've made that normal. But again, tolerance, not imposing your ideas on others.
Sorry to interject again. That's not normal around the world today, though.
It's not normal around the world today, and it was really not normal around the world in August of 1790,
Right.
which
But
is when this letter was written.
it
Yeah,
still hasn't gained popularity. The tough man or the dictator or authoritarian of whatever stripe is still the dominant
yeah,
or right?
yeah,
Huh.
absolutely. And the next line, he repeats back the language that was in the letter to him. For happily the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction and to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens, and giving it on all occasions their effectual support, which
Gosh,
means you don't have absolute liberty. You still have to be a good citizen, but to everyone who's a good citizen, that's all government requires of you. you know, and if you are a good citizen, then hopefully this is a government which will never sanction bigotry and it will never engage in helping people persecute you. And then he allows himself a little immodesty. He's like, or not immodesty, but he acknowledges one of the reasons why I like your letter is it's complimenting me. Which he says, like, of course I'm gonna like this letter. You're saying I'm doing a good job. But um, may the children of the stock of Abraham and dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants. While everyone, I love this line, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid.
there should be none.
Meaning you're going to have your own vine, you're going to have your own fig tree, and nobody's ever going to make you afraid. That's our government doesn't promise you more than that. It's still got to be your own vine, still got to be your own fig tree. But the goal here is that if you've got your own vine and you've got your own fig tree, that nobody should ever make you afraid. Uh, and then the final line, which is, maybe we should save this for the end of the show as a our benediction. But may the Father of all mercies scatter light and not darkness in our paths, and make us all in our several vocations useful here, and in his own due time and way everlastingly happy.
Wow.
And that's and people will say, oh, this becomes a sort of basis of you know, in a very real sense, religious toleration in America, because we can say, you know, as Jefferson would, a lot of people would point to Jefferson saying, well, he's the father of religious liberty. But Washington was providing such a powerful example that everything he did, no one would dare to not do. And so this letter didn't just protect Jewish people in America for centuries. I mean, again, didn't protect them from persecution from others. It didn't protect them from um, de facto discrimination, de rigueur discrimination, but it meant that the federal government was not going to engage
System.
in religious persecution because of this really important, uh, basis of our liberties, liberty of conscience. And it also, just to tie it into the modern day, more modern day, in the modern civil rights movement, it becomes how Dwight Eisenhower, chooses to emphasize civil rights is to build upon this basis of this liberty of conscience. So it becomes it's in essence, the American slavery, American freedom story of slavery and representative government is you don't get to exclude that story from American history, but it's not the only thing that happened in American history. The other thing that happened in American history was that we built a society based on liberty of conscience. And that's where most of the good stuff has come from in America. this idea that that if we scatter some light in our paths instead of darkness, and we engage in vocations that make us useful here, that we will experience some everlasting happiness. And I think those messages still hold true.
What a deep letter, man. That's just really, I had no idea. I can't believe I've never heard of this thing.
Bart's got a,
Here, I've
Bart,
got a finger up.
yeah, yeah.
I
Oh,
just want to add something
go
really
ahead.
quickly that I don't think was clear. I think it's great, Stephen. Your preparation here is amazing for this, because I know you try not to prepare for these, but another aspect of that letter that makes it really, really important is that Washington didn't just write the letter. He didn't just have an exchange of letters with this Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. And incidentally, that congregation is still there. You can actually visit the building and all that stuff. Washington actually stopped there, when during the period of like the Whiskey Rebellion and all that kind of stuff. I think it must have, well, from seeing Hamilton recently. So I have no idea if any of this is true, but Washington, I guess, took some advice from Alexander Hamilton, and he kind of started traveling around the original 13 states to try to cement the legitimacy, of the new federal government. Well, one of the places he actually stopped and spent some time was this congregation in Newport, Rhode Island.
Yes.
And he didn't just write these letters. He actually went there. He talked to the members of this congregation, and some of the descendants of those people are still around. There was that congregation is called the Touro Synagogue. It's Touro. And there was a federal judge in Boston for a long time who had that last name and was a descendant of that family. So this is kind of a very, it was kind of a landmark moment in a way.
Bart, how do you know all this?
Oh, because I'm Jewish and I study these things. And my families do not go back to that period of time, which is kind of interesting. I mean, my family's, the earliest I can really trace my families to being in this country is kind of maybe the late 1840s, early 1850s. And some of my relatives are rather, how can I say this politely, ignominious. they a lot of them ended up in the southern part of the US, and I'm not sure that some of them were not slave traders and various things, because some of my relatives from that part of the country have the last names of some people who were pretty notoriously bad humans. So I'm not proud of that. But the reality is, Jews have been in this country since the beginning. They came over originally to New Amsterdam. The Dutch originally settled what is now New York. And they had a trading company. What was it called, Stephen? The Dutch East India Company?
Yeah, Dutch East India Trading Company.
Yeah.
And so the
some
first
Jews.
15 Jewish families came to Newport, Rhode Island in 1658.
Okay. So, so even earlier.
So there were 25 Jewish families in Rhode Island, Newport, when at the time of this letter writing.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and at that time, that was probably a lot of Jewish people.
Well, it's funny, you know, I'm wearing my Ohio University sweatshirt, which I don't remember if John made fun of this one before the show or during the show, but it was before the show. But so I bought this sweatshirt in the fall of 1998, and when I first moved to Athens, Ohio, I didn't have a place to live. So my first night there, I stayed in the Thunderbird Motel in the Plains, which is where Joe Burrow's from, if you want those football fans. And not a nice area. And I had a phone number of somebody who could rent me a house, maybe. And because I'm me, and I just, you know, walked in and I said, "All right, this seems fair." And is the I didn't even know where the college was, and I said, "Yeah, I'll take it." And I lived there for the whole time I was there. And my landlady was a really old lady by the name of Ida Pilette, and she eventually passed away, and her son, Alan, became my landlord, and then he passed away. But a few years ago, was trying to find out if, you know, any members of the Pilette family were still around. And what did I discover? But they were one of the first Jewish families to settle in southeastern Ohio. And I did as much as you could, a little bit of a deep dive at looking at some old archival newspapers that I had access to, and you know, the Ohio University was Ohio's first and finest university, founded by the Second Continental Congress under the Northwest Ordinance, so it's much older than Ohio State. And the original area was surveyed by Washington and Manasseh Cutler, and the original settlers of Ohio first said this is where we should build the college, and that's why the town is called Athens, as a center of education. But those original pioneer settlers, if you want to call them that, from the settled pretty early. We're talking early 1800s, and Ohio University was founded in 1803. And, you know, it reminds us how people immigrated. Your original question was about family. Usually it would be a family or a small group of families, and who would move out together into a place that looked like it was going to be the next place that was going to grow. And these Jewish communities would sometimes be started really with 2 or 3 families. And because they don't proselytize, and because of a sort of pretty rampant discrimination, they tended to not get much bigger. Maybe if they were successful enough, a couple more Jewish families might move to that area or something. But in the case of some of these families, you would just sort of have the same small 3 Jewish families, and then if they lived a long time, and they would send their kids away to school often, which was also kind of interesting because they typically, other people tended to educate their kids close to home, but they would leave and come back with a wife. Anyway, it's just another small reminder of that these patterns of tolerance reach far into the distance. They don't guarantee happiness, and they don't guarantee that you will never experience discrimination. But I know it always sounds crazy for me to say this as good news, but in America, you get a murder and not a massacre, and a massacre instead of a genocide, because the difference is that from the top down, the system is limiting the abuse that we can heap upon one another, not rather than encouraging it. And if we're going to be happy about things from our past, we should be happy about that. And if we want to be concerned about things from our future, it's that we have concerns that we aren't teaching true tolerance enough. Um, Even when I see people using this document or this quote, a few lines from the letter, it's often in the service of something that it goes beyond um, tolerance.
Gosh, awesome stuff, Professor. This is just great. Unfortunately, I've got to interrupt us to keep on time because we're, believe it or not, almost out of time. I have three main thrusts still before
Okay.
we see what else Bart and Jake have to bring up or want to bring up. Just a couple lines on work. Over the holidays, I alluded to this premise you didn't necessarily agree with, but I think there's a ton of people that, except for maybe Christmas Day, are working straight through the holidays, whether it's retail or hotels or they're not farmers anymore. They're just working hourly and they have got to work for a
Oh,
living.
when I worked at Long's Drugs, I loved that time and a half. Are you kidding me? I
Yeah.
wanted to work every holiday
Yeah.
because
I mean, they're just
big
working
difference
away.
between 450 time and a half, or and on if you worked on the actual holiday, double time and a half. Oh, come on.
So
That
I
was
think we're forgetting that there's some people that just have to keep their, what is that? Nose to the ground. What is it?
nose
Shoulder
to
to
the
the,
grindstone. Yeah.
yeah. Agree or disagree? And this time, most of us are fairly fortunate, but not everyone. But this is a pretty good time as far as work. I know we have to worry about these macro trends, but the bottom line is anything to think about over the holidays regarding work in general. I mean, is it? Oh, here's my question. I think this is true. A guy born in the suburbs of Denver, me, and I could go to school, which I did, and another school, which I did, but I didn't have to. I carried hod for my brother who's a stonemason. I was a janitor. I was a delivery guy. I've done lots of weird stuff in my life. But I could just pick up and move to a different state and do the same thing or something different. That hasn't always been true, has it? Didn't that
No.
family safety structure you didn't just get to be whatever the heck I wanted to be? When did that change? And how do we reflect on that as Americans? That do we have it pretty good or no, there's a really AI is going to take over the world and we better be careful. I mean, it gives us some perspective on that.
Well,
A lot.
in some ways, we might look back on the sort of 1990s as being the best of times in that regard, because that's when you would say like schools were still good, economy was generally good, um, and anybody, including black people, gay people, and lesbians, could move um, anywhere in the United States and um, be, and get a job and move up in the ranks. Um, you know, and then depending on which group of people you're talking about, I might give you a different decade, um, but maybe the 90s and 2000s were sort of the high point of.
But why has it gotten worse in the last 20 years, 30 years?
Because I would just say because of the decline of the institutions that used to mark merit. So this stuff we talk about all the time, but really the decline of higher education and media institutions. That so in some ways,
Military's still there for a lot of people.
yeah, the military is still there, and still, you know, largely denotes, merit.
Yeah, but upward progression, you join the military as a private and you
Sure.
can learn some school skills and
Yeah. But I just think, the AEI just came, my AEI newsletter this morning came out with some letter of, these 38 schools, I think that were, the only truly elite schools that control about half of, more than half of these, uh, of all these elite things are still controlled by just the elite. And that's a little bit depressing, especially when you realize that, um, yeah, 34 colleges that, and their suggestion is we should just stop hiring people from those 34 colleges. And I would say I would normally be on board with that sort of thing, but and I guess I basically am, but the problem is we can't really trust a lot of the colleges anymore, um, I- to be
Develop
in
good citizens, to cut to
sort
the
of
chase.
basic education. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's
Okay.
why I I sort of think that in the 90s you still had uh, enough old liberals running higher education, and I'm not, and by the way, I was a big critic of the old liberals in higher education and in the media back in the 90s and 2000s, but I would never say that what has replaced them is better.
Yeah, not realizing how much worse it could become, huh? Okay. Um,
Yeah. Well, having a
this
biased standard is worse than having, a standard of violence and hatred and discrimination.
30 seconds on this. I'm wearing the Christmas Santa hat. Nothing stands for Christmas more than a Santa hat, right?
And maybe a Coca-Cola.
Okay, fair enough. But it is a Christian holiday, right? It's not a Santa holiday, is it? It's not a Coke holiday, or is it? What is?
No, I mean, it's just in many ways, like many things in America, this sort of blending of commerce and and storytelling. That's what creates culture. So, some people say, oh, it's crazy that we do it this way in America because it was invented as part of a Coca-Cola ad or something. And you
Right.
say, well, that's what culture is, that's just that's good advertising
It
when
doesn't
you're
affront your sensibilities as a Christian.
pardon?
It doesn't cause you chagrin as a Christian.
No, I mean, I don't know. I always think that as a parent and as a Christian, my job is to take care of what's between my ears and my kids, and to teach them that there are some things that are of this world, and that's just the way the world is, and my kids live in the world. But what you hope is that you're also teaching them that there is this other spiritual world that is not a part of the secular world, um and we have to live in it and be normal, but
So
uh,
the surveys, and then Bart's going to jump in here too. The surveys say that faith continues to decline year after year after year after year after year, and now I think agnostics, if not atheists, are not a majority, but I think they're a plurality. They're larger than any other subgroup. Is that generally right? Have you seen something to
yep,
that effect?
yeah.
And is that the death of America, or is that a virtue of America, or neither?
Gone through these, it's hard to say because we've gone through these periods before. We tend to think that America has always been a Christian church going nation, but we've gone through some periods like this before, where people that go to church or believe anything, and then we'll have an awakening, or a second great awakening, or a third great awakening. But so who knows? It might come around again. But you know, in all these things, what makes it more dangerous now is how everything gets labeled uh, um, and managed. you know, and in a way, once you start doing that, it turns into a story that becomes reality. And that's when some changes can become permanent, um, if we give a little too much weight to how we look at survey questions.
Mm,
Um, because sometimes people will ask questions about faith, not understanding what faith is, or at least I just say like what my faith is, and say, oh, well, if you don't live in certainty 100% of the time, you're not a person of faith. And like, that's not what any faith journey that I uh, know about is like. Um, I think the metric that I would follow is just things like church attendance.
mhm.
I think that is something worth paying attention too. And it is troubling that the weekly church attendance is, particularly in mainstream mainline Protestant churches, I find to be a very disturbing trend. That
Yeah, everybody's going evangelical or not at all.
Yeah, and the evangelical thing tends to be, boom and bust, charismatic leader, and services for kids, and it's like, oh,
Awkward.
we're gonna go to this rock show once a week, and because they have a mate, and I don't know if you've been to one of these mega
I
churches,
have.
incredible. I
Yeah,
mean, the services or you're looking for a spouse.
fun.
You're like, I need to
Or
go find
business.
a wife, and yeah,
Or business. Yeah.
yeah.
So, but you're upbeat. You're not a doomsayer on any of this, right? You think it's all part of life, and
I just don't think that gloom and doom is any kind of an answer. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Just sit in our closets and bang our head against the wall? Like, that doesn't. It's not going to make me happy. So for my own happiness, I, I mean, Steve Knott on, mentioned in that, for the rest of his life, he's going to engage in civic education, because what else can he do?
mm-hmm.
You know, we're going to do this podcast because what else can we do? There's
Right.
no, like, we're doing what we know how to do to try to help a little. And, I think we're all, accomplished enough in life to learn the basic lesson that worrying about something doesn't help, and that as long when you're working towards something, it makes you feel better.
Helps a lot.
uh,
Yeah, nice. Let me transition again to Bart. Bart, if my memory's right or my calendar is right, Hanukkah coincides with Christmas pretty closely this year. Is there anything that you want to chat about the history of Judaism that Christians and non-Christians should at least consider over the holidays? Is there anything you want to add to this conversation? I thought Professor Tootle's Washington letter and the Hebrew congregation. Wow, maybe he just answered everything and you added to it. So, is there anything else though that you would like to add today for our reflection? You're off. You're on mute, Bart.
Doing okay. Now I'm off mute. The only thing I would add is that and this is one thing that I think particularly Christians don't understand, is that Hanukkah is a very, very different kind of holiday from Christmas.
Yep.
In fact, gift giving and I don't know, being very joyous is only a modern feature of Hanukkah, and I think they introduced that mainly because a lot of Jewish, very successful Jewish business people decided that it would make a lot of sense if Jewish people were also buying presents for their kids during the Christmas holiday. That's why we do it. Hanukkah is an interesting Jewish holiday because it actually celebrates the end of a war. It's the only holiday in Judaism that actually celebrates a war.
Which one?
It was the Maccabee rebellion that occurred way back in, I'm not even going to attempt to figure out when that was, but Israel was being ruled by kind of a Greek influenced dynasty at the time. And the Maccabees were kind of a sect of Jews that decided, you know what, we're tired of this and we're not going to take it anymore. And they revolted, and it took a really long time, but they eventually were victorious in this revolution. And this regime that was ruling over that part of the world withdrew. And Hanukkah celebrates the fact that they wanted to reconsecrate the temple in Jerusalem. In order to do that, they needed to light an eternal light, which is actually something that's a feature of all synagogues even to this day.
Hmm.
They only had enough oil, though, to kindle a light supposedly for one day. Well, for some reason, the light remained kindled for 8 days. And because of that, we celebrate the holiday actually for 8 days, and the menorah has that many candles in it and all of that. But that's really what it's celebrating. And interestingly enough, one of the things that I didn't realize about Hanukkah until I got married and my wife kind of filled me in on it is that when you light a menorah, you're actually supposed to put it in a window or some public, uh, publicly visible part of your house. And the reason for that is you are supposed to be showing the world that you're celebrating this holiday. You believe in um, you believe in God and all of that. And that's why we do it that way. And we actually now, I mean, here in Denver, I know they do a public menorah lighting at a location kind of in central Denver. And they actually, there are Jewish people who believe you really need to do this outside, and I
So
don't
you
light my
are
menorah outside because the wind will blow the candles over. but, but those are some interesting little facets of the holiday.
well, so Bart, for a Christian or non-Christian, besides Professor Tootle's explanation of Washington, which is just tremendous, awesome, what do we need to know about Jewish folks over the holidays? Is there anything? Can we ignore you, or can I wish you a Merry Christmas, or do I have to say Happy Hanukkah? What I mean, what do we
Sure.
culturally? Is there anything that you'd like to tell us today in a history kind of way?
Oh, absolutely. And that's something I run into kind of on a daily basis this time of year. It's like I get wished Merry Christmas any number of times. And a lot of times I just wish whoever wished me Merry Christmas back. Because frankly, I think, I think Christians are entitled to be wished a Merry Christmas. I think that's just fine.
Tidings of
There's
comfort and
nothing
joy,
wrong with
right?
that. And if
Yeah.
I'm actually friends with somebody, I'll kind of tell them, well, I'm celebrating Hanukkah. And they kind of go, oh, happy Hanukkah, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, I think Jews, for the most part, with Jews, there are so few of us in this country as a percentage. Most of us spend most of our time worrying about kind of the ultimate assimilation of Jews into the rest of the population, which of course is somewhat inevitable. It's going to happen. So a lot of Jews this time of year talk about the fact that, oh, Christmas is so all enveloping. There are advertisements and billboards, and when people watch network television more, you couldn't get away from Christmas ads. And a
John
lot of
wears the
Jewish.
hat.
What's that?
John wears the hat.
Oh, the hat is wonderful, John. No, I think it's great. No, that's if you run into a Jew who is talking about that kind of stuff, that's why usually is Jews get very wrapped up in that whole issue. And that's okay. I
I
tend
would
not
say
to
that,
get that wrapped up in it because I realize that I live in a society that's predominantly not Jewish. So,
Sure.
yeah, here's the miracle of America that, in America on St. Patrick's Day, Protestants wear green, and every now and then we have to remind ourselves, like, that's when that, that in a way you've arrived. I don't know any Irish people who complain about the mascot of Notre Dame, and say, oh, that's racist and how
mhm.
dare you oppress, it's like, oh, that's our leprechaun guy, and I don't know of any Protestants who feel like oppressed by Catholics on St. Patrick's Day. They put on the green hat and, they wear the Kiss Me I'm Irish buttons. So, um, in a way, that's what, almost any group that is assimilated gets to celebrate when it's not your holiday, and yet you can partake in it and everybody's just fine with it.
Love that. Love that. Jake, you get the what is it?
An
Penultimate
ultimate.
comment or question of whatever stripe you'd like. Or you can skip it, but you get the second to last word. We'll end with Professor Tootle. Any thoughts from either your religion or anything you've heard today that we should consider over the holidays?
Well, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I feel like my religious views have already been expressed. I mean, Bart, I've known you for like over 3 years. I did not know you were Jewish until today. But yeah. So all I know is I'm going to be spending Christmas with my in-laws in Colorado Springs, and
Nice.
it's not nice, but I do it.
Oh God, you're too into marriage, too new into marriage to say that on the record, Jake. So I moved to
They're not
retract.
listeners. Maybe the problem is they're not fans.
My wife is well aware of my sentiments. I thought we were only so we're leaving on Monday, and I thought we were only going to stay till the 27th. I have now been informed that we are driving home on the 29th.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Well,
whatever.
yeah.
Well, that's a unifying theme that everyone loves family around the holidays.
Yeah. I'm profoundly lucky in that almost all my family lives around me, and we get to all be together. But the other nice thing is that we're together all the time. So in a way, Christmas just feels like, yeah, it's slightly more special because the kids are really excited about opening their presents, and my sister with her 13 grandchildren, you know,
Wow.
and the oldest is 8. So, everything like this is just crazy, which is wonderful because we get, three babies and then a lot of really young kids, and that always makes holidays special. And
Hard
you
not to
get
be
to have
joyful.
yeah, and every now and then you get these little moments where I'll see my dad or my mom or my stepdad with one of the little kids, and you realize like, oh, that's they're creating just a little memory that is going to be with them forever.
Mhm.
And some of these people here are not going to be here forever, but these little moments are the ones that you know are going to be talked about for the next 100 years.
Love that. Okay, Professor, any other concluding remarks, or are we good for today by pausing to reflect on family and faith and neighbors and holidays and religion and the founding of our country in a non-political way? Is this a comfortable conversation for you today? Is this worthwhile to do occasionally?
Yeah, I really never want to miss a chance to talk about tolerance and the importance of tolerance, and I think that the holidays are a great example of, I don't need to be a different religion, and I don't need other people to have my religion. I can leave people alone, and I can be happy for them in their faith, and try to tell myself that, like our political journey, our faith journeys are going to be long, and what you should try to do is be proud of how you act all the time, so that someday you won't have to apologize to someone for how you tried to impose your politics on them or your faith on them. And the founders gave us some pretty good um, advice on how to approach these issues.
Lovely. Professor, Merry Christmas. And Jake, Bart, Happy Hanukkah. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it. We'll regroup next week. I do plan on a fairly robust political conversations and a variety of topics come January. Heads
Okay.
up. I don't want to be chasing every crazy tweet for 4 years. I just don't want to do that. But there are going to be some major substantive public policy issues that I think we as citizens should think through together and not
Yep.
just be reactionary to them, actually putting a framework around it so we can think through in a deep issue way. That's my agenda for 2025. Fair enough?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Y'all happy Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Hope you have a good season here.
Merry
Yeah.
Christmas.
Yeah. All
See
right.
y'all.
Thank y'all.